Some parents do everything in their power to mitigate screen harms at home, but then their children go to school and they experience hours of screen time in the guise of educational technology, or EdTech.
Hello, I'm Andy Perrier,
And I'm Matt Lovegrove.
and this is So What, the podcast dedicated to cutting through the noise of EdTech and asking the most important question in education. But Matthew, why have you summoned this emergency podcast?
Andy, can I start off by asking you what year we're in currently?
LOL 2025. and the other letters.
Indeed. Now, I wanted to ask for your opinion on a video that has been spreading around social media over the last few days. Have you come across Sophie Winkleman's video on EdTech?
As in Big Suze from Peep Show.
That's the one.
I was curious as to think why you wanted this emergency podcast, but now it's all becoming a bit clearer.
So this is a video of, like you said, the actress Sophie Winkleman. She is talking at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. I don't know whether you've come across the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
Any organisation that starts with Alliance, I'm very weary of.
They're designed to unite conservative voices, and they're proposing policy at the moment based on traditional Western values. And Sophie is talking about EdTech in schools and the impact of that on students. And I wanted your reaction to her comments.
So this is Sophie Winkleman, Claudia Winkleman's half sister, a member of the royal family, actress, and EdTech expert.
Well, according to her, she is. Yeah.
All right. So how do you want to do this then? Are we going to watch the video and then we'll have a little talk about it?
I'm going to show you the video, pause it here and there, and then I'd love your views.
Some parents do everything in their power to mitigate screen harms at home, but then their children go to school and they experience hours of screen time in the guise of educational technology, or EdTech. Whether that's in the form of iPads and Alexa voice assistants for nursery school children, learning systems like PowerSchool in primary school, or Google Classroom on secondary school devices.
This is incredible. So I have never seen an Alexa being used in an early years setting. Have you?
No, I've never seen students use Alexas at school. I know they do at home. But also PowerSchool, the piece of software she referenced there, that's a school information management system. That's not something that students directly interact with in primary school anyway.
That helps teachers take the register. Lovely. And then she does mention Google Classroom in school. So she's got one out of three ain't bad.
So Andy, she also said that some parents do everything in their power to mitigate screen harms at home, but then their children go to school and they experience hours of screen time in the guise of EdTech. What's your take on that?
Matt, I would argue that teachers are best placed to be able to support students with the use of technology to enable their learning. If we think about your friend and mine, the pick-rat scale that we've talked about a couple of times, that student relationship with technology is going to be passive. That content consumption, that scrolling is going to be interactive, working with the piece of software or working with someone on something, or it's going to be creative, that top layer, creating something that wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for some amazing EdTech. I would argue that most parents at home would look at their children on devices and go, they're passive. They're not really doing anything beyond doom scrolling. They're not really doing anything beyond that bottom layer. So I think what Sophie Winkleman is failing to understand is that there are many different facets of how technology gets used. She's bundling together all of screen time when we need to start thinking about screen use. And I said this before, if a science teacher has the Bunsen burners going in that chemistry lab, and after 10 minutes it goes, right, you've had your 10 minutes Bunsen time, that would never happen. So she's failing to understand that there are many different facets of how technology gets used and that not all screen time is the same. It's how we use the devices to enable learning that really makes an effective difference.
Indeed. And, I was thinking about this through the lens of accessibility. One of our previous podcasts, we look at those accessibility tools. There was a really interesting comment on the video that was posted from someone who I assume is either a teacher or a parent saying, dyslexic or neurodivergent children won't benefit from extra books, pencils, and pens. Assistive technology is an absolute boon to some of these children, supporting them to demonstrate their intellect in the best way. And as with most things in life, it's all about balance and a deeper understanding of the range of educational needs across young people. And like we said in one of our previous podcasts, if technology is here to solve a problem, accessibility is a key problem that we know that technology can solve very, very successfully.
I'm trying to put myself into the headspace of someone that wants traditional Western values. I'm harking back to the number of students from the 70s, 80s, 90s that had a really, really awful time at school, that they slipped through the net, that there wasn't anything for them that they enjoyed because there wasn't that level of personalization, there wasn't that level of opportunity. So you're absolutely right. The fact that technology can deliver this form of accessibility at scale, regardless of how many students are in your class, regardless of how many students are in your school.
Andy, it irks me here that she says that parents are working hard to mitigate screen harms at home, but then children go to school and experience hours of screen time in the guise of EdTech. Surely children are at greater risk of harm at home than in a school setting with technology.
The school use of screens is not the issue. It's how they're being used at home. That's the issue. So as educators, we need to think not inwardly, but outwardly. How do we support our communities with how they best utilize devices at home, and what tools can we give them to support with that?
I completely agree. This for me is one of her biggest failings in what she opened up this talk with. She's bundled screen time together as one whole thing without considering just how multifaceted this is. Like you said, screen use is very different to screen time.
All right, so that was the first 27 seconds of the video. Shall we carry on, Matt, and have a little...
Let's continue. Absolutely.
Who has proven that this deluge of screen education is what's best for our children? No one has. If we step back and view this state of affairs through a compassionate lens, it's fairly understandable. Let's wave aside the fact that only 7% of UK EdTech companies have conducted randomized controlled trials, and just 12% have used third-party certification. Let's put these pesky facts aside.
Facts are pesky. All right, randomized controlled trials are really challenging in school because essentially what you're doing is let's put EdTech into one classroom and no EdTech into another, and we'll use them as guinea pigs. So it is really challenging how we evaluate the use of EdTech, but we don't evaluate the use of EdTech. We evaluate the learning outcomes and the technology that supports with that. We don't evaluate the buttons and the features of a tool. Does this enhance the student experience? Does it make the school better? That's what you evaluate. So EdTech companies are going to find it really hard to look at those metrics when all they're trying to do is sell a product.
When I listen to this, she talks about, is anyone measuring this? Is anyone looking at this? 7% of UK EdTech companies have conducted trials and all that kind of stuff. The recent Leo Academy report on educational technology implementation showed huge benefits to staff, children, and parents. And it showed huge gains for students in terms of learning outcomes when technology was implemented with a pedagogical philosophy up front. So it wasn't just using technology for technology's sake, it was using it for a real learning purpose.
Yeah, so any implementation that is successful is going to garner successful results. But if you flip it, let's take EdTech completely out of the way and think about something like rewrite ink. That's got a very specific implementation process that if it's not done properly, I have seen in schools where they haven't streamed the students, they haven't done the exact timings of quite the long lesson, and phonics isn't as successful. That's a completely analog approach inside schools, but because the implementation hasn't been done, it hasn't been very successful. So should we just not have phonics either? I suppose that's the weird dichotomy that she's trying to kind of evoke with our pesky facts.
Yeah, again, it comes back to the why, doesn't it? The so what are we using these tools for? How are they making a difference to students and their learning? And that's what she's failing to understand so far.
All right, so shall we carry on with the video?
Let's carry on. Here we go.
At the beginning, these products seemed futuristically exciting. Well-intentioned schools spent fortunes buying and implementing the latest software and trained their teachers in how to use it. And some of the tools, like no more marking, have been helpful for teachers. But now we have better data on how tech is impacting pupils. So we must press pause and, in many cases, rewind.
Wow. Lots to unpack there. So she's just thrown in the fact that we've now got data on pupil impact. I hope she's going to share where that impact on pupil data has been. What school has ever spent fortunes in implementing the latest EdTech? That's what I have a bit of an issue with here. Schools and educational systems are often the last adopters in technology because they know that they cannot invest in fads and in things that might disappear in the next few years, because the teacher confidence has to be that there is going to be pedagogical value, intent and impact in whatever they use.
I would say that schools are desperately trying to give their students the best possible opportunities to excel in our ever-evolving world. Schools are aware that work is going to be very different for children in schools than it was when we left school, Andy. This is that they're about to enter a very different type of workplace, and schools are doing their best to prepare students for that with technology.
Yeah, and it's a completely unknown world that our students are going to enter. So we have to prepare for the unknown. What we do know is that technology is going to play a massive part in our young students' world as adults in the workplace. So we have to prepare them for that, and it's very simple. If we press pause or rewind, we do a couple of things. We put our students at a massive disadvantage to other schools that are preparing their students. But there is another part of this, which is around the idea of global competitiveness, maybe. The fact that other economies, emerging economies, mature economies, their workforce is going to be leading in competitive innovation, whilst our students, who have not had the opportunity to innovate, to collaborate, to learn, they're going to be left in the dust because they are not going to have the same skills, the same tools in order to be at that top level of what it is to be innovative in a world market, which is constantly changing, constantly evolving. We don't know what the next kind of 15 years is going to look like.
Okay, Andy, let's carry on.
The Karolinska Institute in Sweden recently published research concluding that there's clear scientific evidence that tools impair rather than enhance learning. Sweden has taken note and been the first country to kick tech out of the classroom, reinvesting in books, paper and pens. They had the courage to admit that EdTech was a failed experiment.
That sounds like absolute nonsense.
And it really worries me that applause that the audience gave. I mean, I'll come back to my first question to you. I'm not sure if these people know that we're living in 2025.
No, these are the people that were very successful at school in spite of having no technology, and they don't care two hoots about an inclusive education that supports everyone. Sweden haven't kicked out all the technology, have they?
No, Andy, they haven't. I did some research on this. I wanted to verify this, and it's not true. What they're actually doing, I think rightly, is evaluating the impact of EdTech in their schools. So the kind of history here is really interesting. Back in 2009, the country made a big push to replace the kind of traditional textbook teaching with computers and digital tools. They wanted to modernize education, which was a good thing. What they're starting to do now is look at that through the context of learning and check that students are having the best possible outcomes. That teachers are understanding moderation more. They're understanding the need to moderate more. It might have been that they've gone a little bit too far, but what they're not doing is just removing technology from their classrooms. They're evaluating it. They're thinking, where is this having the impact? Where it's not having the impact, let's not use it. And where it is having the impact, let's continue using it. And actually, there was a really interesting comment on the video from someone who said, I'm in Sweden. I've got kids in school in Stockholm. I've never heard of a school in Sweden that don't use iPads or computers in the classroom.
Matt, who do I need to write to in the Swedish government to say you've nicked our idea for a podcast and implemented it across the entire educational landscape? Because it sounds like what they're doing is just asking, so what? The courage to kick out EdTech. It just all feels very loaded, doesn't it?
It does indeed, yeah. Some of this has come from the schools minister in Sweden. I found out when I was doing some research on this that a couple of years ago, she said that Sweden students need more textbooks. Physical books are important for student learning. She also went on to say, we believe the focus should return to acquiring knowledge through printed textbooks and teacher expertise, rather than acquiring knowledge primarily from freely available digital sources that have not been vetted for accuracy. What's your take on that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, books can be wrong. Like the printed book can often be wrong or out of date as well. So I don't agree with the logic of saying digital data has no veracity to it. I mean, Sweden has spent decades building this incredible culture of people that ripples through education. But there are countries that have implemented tech really, really well, like Estonia, Finland, Singapore. We talked about implementation. They've implemented it really well, and they're seeing massive success in the use of educational technology to support educational goals. So I just think if the approach for them at that time from that minister was like, oh, we need to go back to books, they're not actually, they haven't thought, what problem are we trying to solve? It's how are we changing what tool we use? And they're asking the wrong question.
And for me too, I think there is a huge amount of digital information available. It's growing by the day. Shouldn't we be teaching students to look at that through a critical lens to help them survive and thrive in a world of ever-increasing digital information, rather than just going back to textbook? Let's watch some more.
Bill Gates himself said that devices have a lousy record in the classroom. Mark Zuckerberg went to a tech-free school in Boston. Steve Jobs didn't let his own children use iPads. UNESCO says moderation should be the key word relating to classroom tech use.
So she mentioned there that UNESCO says moderation should be the key word related to classroom tech use. And I would agree with that, Andy. I think we do need to be careful about moderation here. What's your opinion on that?
One of my favorite quotes that is often attributed to wildly different people, Socrates and Oscar Wilde. Everything in moderation, including moderation. You can't use tech executives' personal preference for how they raise their children as evidence that EdTech does not have a positive impact in the class. Also, there's no evidence, but the evidence I want to use is the anecdote of a billionaire.
And it is interesting because I read recently that the head of TikTok doesn't allow his own children to use TikTok, which is really interesting. But that's because of its passive nature, right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, there is the passive scrolling through it. But think about all the content creators that are on it, which might be everything from, yes, you've got the teenagers dancing at the park that you walk past and just think, that's really annoying. But actually, no, they're creating content. They're sharing it with an audience. They're sharing an expression. Why shouldn't we kind of, applaud that? And also think about Picrat, passive, interactive, creative. They are right at the top of creative. They're doing something and sharing it with a global audience, which is pretty cool.
And again, it comes back to, for me, in schools, students are typically not using technology in a passive manner. They're being far more creative and far more interactive with it. Right, let's move on.
The OECD found that most EdTech has not delivered the academic benefits once promised, and that students who use computers very frequently at school do a lot worse in most learning outcomes. Global test scores in maths, science, and reading are plummeting. I've personally spoken to teachers in British state schools who've acknowledged that classroom tech has hampered the progress of many of their pupils, and the huge boom in tutoring among private school children points to the fact that they're not learning well in school either.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that she said that. I mean, there's a couple of things. In state schools, like, is it solely the tool in the classroom that is hampering the impact of the children? Or is it a myriad of reasons in that have teachers been given time to have the training in order to use it? Maybe.
Exactly.
Have they been given, is there enough funding within the system to support with this? Did the Wi-Fi work that day? There are, I mean, everyone knows that EdTech and tech has its issues.
So, Andy, that's really interesting. I too have been in classrooms where tech has hampered learning.
I've been in the classroom where teachers have hampered learning.
Absolutely, haven't we all? It happens, doesn't it? But, I've also been in classrooms where tech has made a huge difference to learning. And we've all seen this, haven't we? We've all seen technology fail, and we've all seen it succeed. And like you said, I think a lot of it comes down to teacher training and pedagogical understanding. Interestingly, though, in this comment, she says that the OECD has found that most EdTech has not delivered the academic benefits once promised, and that students who use computers very frequently at school do a lot worse in learning outcomes. I delved into this report actually the other night and found that the OECD has actually found that students who use computers moderately at school tend to have somewhat better learning outcomes than those who use computers rarely. So again, she's taking it to this extreme, hasn't she, where she's thinking that children are in front of devices all day, every day, and that's what's happening in school. Whereas the research is actually suggesting that if students use technology where it can have the most impact, it has successful outcomes on their learning.
Yeah, I mean, you can find research to argue any which way, but I think there is a point in the grand scheme of things that says EdTech is not a silver bullet.
Mhm.
It's not going to dramatically improve student attainment just like that. It's part of a holistic education. What we're doing is we're offering a positive student experience by being able to give them things that they would have been able to do without the use of technology. Yes, we can go back to pencil and paper, but then are we able to collaborate with schools around the world? Are we able to create something for a global audience? Are we able just to watch some historical World War I footage by Peter Jackson, 60 frames a second, full color? Technology is there to enrich, it's there to enhance, it's there to augment. It's not there to replace teaching. And I think every teacher knows this. I don't think I need to actually spell it out for anyone that technology supports learning. We learn with technology. We don't just use technology. It's there for a reason as an enabler.
Right, Andy, let's go.
Oh, there's more. There is. All right. Okay, let's go.
So why are we getting so overexcited about EdTech here in Britain? Why are we outsourcing executive function skills to a computer? Why are we allowing exam boards to take every subject online by 2030? All the emerging research should generate a pulling up of the drawbridge rather than the open-armed embrace that we're seeing.
So she's against the advocation of simplifying the exam system.
Well, yeah, and I don't think anyone is expecting technology to outsource executive function skills. That's incredibly over the top.
There's an amazing quote. I'm going to just quickly search for I'm just IBM computer management. Right, Matt, listen to this. A computer can never be held accountable. Therefore, a computer must never make a management decision. Have you ever heard of that quote?
I have not, Andy, no.
That was from a training manual from IBM in 1978. So I think that in even 50 years ago, I think people understood that, yeah, we're not going to have computers overtake the executive function or whatever she said. I am actually interested. Anyone in the comments, how do you feel about exams going online? Do you think it's actually going to help with the marking process? Do you worry about the use of technology in the schools? Do you have enough technology in schools for the exam process to be taken online? I actually would like to, for the first time, offer this out to the comment section, because I think that is a really interesting point around the examinations system and whether we do have a split divide on whether we think that's a good idea or not.
I mean, she mentions here that the exam boards are trying to take every subject online by 2030. That's just not going to happen. Certainly not here in the UK. I know at the moment from talking to people in this arena that the discussions on online exams are currently stopped. They've halted. It may be that some exams start to appear online at some point, but it's certainly not going to be all exams by 2030. And the whole premise of this, her final comment on here, let's pull up the drawbridge rather than the open-armed embrace that we're seeing. I mean,
do you know what happens in the Middle Ages when you pull up the drawbridge? There's a siege and they all starve to death.
We just can't be reversing, right? We need to be careful. We need to be logical. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be pedagogical, but we can't go in reverse, right?
Everything in moderation, including moderation. I think we have to ask the question, what pedagogical value is this adding to the student experience? If it's not, absolutely do a Sweden and change course. But if we're not being reflective practitioners in every aspect of our job, then what is it to be a teacher?
So, Andy, I really enjoyed our reaction video to this.
I enjoyed the idea of the emergency podcast and us just staring at a single laptop rather than putting up our mega studio. So thank you for this. Should we do a normal one next week?
Yes, let's do that.
Let's go back to Western traditional values at the next podcast.
Great stuff. Great to chat.
All right, chat to you soon.
Take care.